I've taken a detour the last 2 to 4 months to really experiment with the channel, and I think I got the message. I'm a slave to manga and manga recommendations for the time being, and I'll accept my penance. So do I have everybody's attention now? And usually when gathering what to read to then recommend or review, recap, I kind of do it all at once. It's a little confusing. I typically just pick a random series out of a hat or go off of what you all recommend in the comments. So if you really want me to read something, the comments are your best bet. This time, I handed out a special golden ticket in the form of text to 15 of my YouTube pals, stating that I was fully obligated to read whatever they recommended, and I couldn't say no, with 2 exceptions, and that is they couldn't recommend me a series that I've already read, or that has been recommended by someone else. And to make sure that I ruin a few friendships for the sake of entertainment, I will rank said recommendations from worst to best at the end of the video, and the winner will have their family member return. The order in which I talk about them throughout the video will simply be in the order that I read them these last few weeks, and I will be linking all the channels that participated in the link in the description below. If you like this sort of thing enough, I might make it a series. The first manga on the checklist was recommended by my buddy Clyde, someone I watched back before I even started the channel and has supported me as a good friend, makes great videos on Bleach and other series as well as content on UFC, and to my surprise his recommendation was Gantz. Only issue is I've already read it, but what I didn't know is that there was a spin-off titled Gantz E. Currently at 55 chapters and ongoing, Gantz E has the same baseline plot of Gantz. The main character gets killed and is now a part of this game of sorts along with other people to survive waves of enemies, and by participating in the killing of said enemies, you can get enough points to be free of this hell simulator. The main difference this time is the setting takes place in feudal Japan instead of modern day Japan, but at its core it's still Gantz. Great action, great artwork, and the staple suits and tech, only this time there are more swords. But at times a messy plot where the occasional thing happens without any sort of prior buildup, and it kinda leaves you wondering how. If you're interested in just cool action, this is worth checking out. For those that have read the original Gantz and wonder how this compares, I would say it's tricky since the characters in Gantz E don't really interest me as much. But I don't really know if I was all that interested in K and the other characters in the original Gantz 50 chapters in. Even if you aren't really crazy about this one, the least I can say is that it's a quick read and could serve as a test for if you're interested in the OG Gantz. Next recommendation is from Lecks, someone who is currently trying to integrate his very spirit into his editing software. Every time we call, my sleep schedule is ruined because of his near autistic ability to go in depth that unlocks that side of me that I'm timid to show at first. But despite the long list of praises, he did take the longest to decide what to recommend me, but to be fair, he is of Cuban descent, so it makes sense that freedom of options and choice was a difficult adjustment. And after careful consideration, he decided to recommend me a manhwa titled Banging My Aunt. Currently ongoing and 105 chapters. Okay, you know what, Mira, Alex, since I know you're watching this with a sick, twisted smile on your face, I want you to know that there are over a few thousand ways to torture and kill a person, all of which have names. But what I will do to you, there isn't even a term invented for it yet. And that isn't a threat or a promise, but an inevitable law, like gravity. This is just porn. It's exactly what you think it is. The main character has an affair with his aunt, the aunt's husband has an affair with the secretary, and the aunt's daughter has a thing for the main character. You would be surprised to know that this might not even be the worst thing recommended to me on the list. On a slightly positive note, Yomi no Tsugai, or Daemons of the Shadow Realm, is a new series brought to you by the creator of Fullmetal Alchemist and recommended by JoJo's YouTuber XForts. If he ever leaks our DMs, I promise I was hacked. Currently ongoing and at 24 chapters, the story follows our main character Yuru, who finds out his life is a lie, and his sister is actually part of an organization that invades his village and is actually trying to rescue him, in which then we learn that MC has 2 daemons, which pretty much serves as the power system for the whole series. Now, under the protection of these individuals, Yuru wants to meet the parents that left him and his sister behind. This series has an interesting thematic consistency throughout the entirety of the series, with the motif of light and dark, the 2 sides of the same coin, and the dynamic between the characters is pretty cool. But for the most part, I didn't like the jarring tonal shifts and the intense moments, and the reading experience is super dense, as I find out a lot of the dialogue to be pretty uninteresting. However, I think it's worth checking out, and I'll admit I'm probably not the most qualified to talk about this since I also dropped Full Metal, so again, just check it out for yourself. I see the potential, but at the current moment, I'm feeling rather indifferent. I think it's safe to say that this might be the most obscure recommendation on the list, which presents itself with 2 outcomes. It's either going to be really good or really shit. There is rarely a middle ground when it comes to, obscure stuff. With more mainstream titles, I've noticed there's a bit more of that middle ground to my experience, but this recommendation comes from JX1, a really smart guy who I think deserves a lot more attention, and his passion for the things he really enjoys is felt and communicated precisely. Given some more consistency, I could easily see him blowing up soon. If you skip the last 10 seconds, rewind, you impatient bastard. The manga is Bokutachi ga Yarimashita, made by the same creator of Jigan and Blue Lock, and this should show the cruel fate of being an author. Sometimes your worst work is the most successful, and your best is drowned in obscurity. But I'm sure he doesn't mind, unlike the prison school author. Poor guy. Sitting at 87 chapters and completed, this story follows a group of friends with some of the weirdest and most eccentric personalities I think I've ever seen, which makes each of them very memorable. To get payback for one of the friends being beaten up by bullies from another school, they decide to get payback in the most rational way possible, placing bombs randomly throughout the school and watch the students freak out. Now, in all fairness to Dumb, Dumber, and Dumber, they were small explosion bombs, but they placed one of them by a gas tank, and it kills around 10 students. Now these goofballs are wanted terrorists, and we follow how each of them deal with this entire situation, which has forever changed their life. This story, despite the comedic undertone, is, well, not even an undertone, like it's pretty comedic. It has a weird blend of that crude comedy like premise. As I was saying, a crude comedy like Prison School, but with the tension and twist amped up tenfold. Easily one of the most entertaining reads I've had with a manga, and if you're starved for something that feels original, then look no further. Going back to romance, don't worry, this one is actually wholesome and worth reading. The Dangers in My Heart is an ongoing series with 133 chapters, recommended by my pal Mikeyuubi, who makes Naruto content and someone I was pals with way before he actually started his channel. He frequently sends me femboy art and asks for my opinion while photoshopping fake tweets of mine, but other than that, he's a pretty cool guy. Dangers in My Heart is a really sweet series of the main character who has serial killer impulses, especially towards the popular girl in his class, but soon falls in love, and you know how this thing kind of goes. Admittedly, certain moments can be a bit vomit-inducing, but for the most part, it's an endearing romance that sees the two characters naturally develop a friendship, and it helps things feel like it's a process instead of just delaying the confession for the sake of it. And despite me at this current moment wanting to completely choke out and beat Cupid into a pulp myself, this was an enjoyable read and it goes by quickly. This is one of the better romance manga I've read, and the anime is pretty solid as well if you prefer anime. Now, if you're looking for a brand new series, Maria no Danzai is a revenge manga currently at 13, well, it actually might be a 50, it was at 13 chapters when I read this. It's recommended to me by Sufferents, who you should all know from his Tokyo Ghoul, JJK, and Chainsaw Man content. Man has a voice I'd kill for. Speaking of killing, the story follows Maria, a mother who has made herself a nurse at this school to get revenge on the bullies that caused the death of her son, even though I'm pretty sure the head bully had a thing for the poor guy he was bullying. Foreshadowing. The art is pretty dope, and Maria as a character has a lot of potential, as well as the story has done a great job of making things very intense. I will say, I have a bit of my reservations, given that this could easily turn into Jujika no Rokunin, which is yikes. But if done well, this can be an engaging revenge story, but I'm not going to get my hopes up. Still, it's easily... Mano, no es tan difícil. Estás hablando inglés por casi toda tu vida. Hágalo bien. If I mess up one more time, I'm not making it to 2024. As I was trying to say, it's easy to get emotionally hooked and be angry at the bully, since by nature fear and or injustice is the primary source of human anger, and it's satisfying to see the mother become a saint of judgment in the school. Oh god, okay. The next recommendation is from Diavolo, and he recommended Dick Fight Island. Look, I'm not gonna say it more clearly, just... Look, I agree to reading every series that was recommended, but I never said that I had to do a good job reviewing it in the video. And I don't know if you noticed by the title, but the series is pretty gay. Listen, the artwork's actually really good, but it's just yaoi porn with fights in between. You know, at least I was able to learn how much a hitman costs at the black market. Expect a knock on your door very soon, Diavolo. Very soon. Thankfully, there would be no more of that. I wrote this, by the way, before I remembered that I only got 14 people and I needed one more. You'll see. This recommendation comes from Degenerocity, who I'm sure you should all know, and he actually caught me off guard with his recommendation, but I was pleasantly surprised. Dead Demons of Destruction, I might have added an extra de, I didn't stutter, that's the title of the series, is a completed work made by one of my favorite manga authors of all time, Inio Asano, and has exactly 100 chapters. Invaders show up in Japan and completely change the lives of the Japanese citizens, especially those in Tokyo, causing them to panic and even take the offensive. We follow two girls that are close friends and are trying to graduate while all of this is going on. The series manages to tie in all of this while using Asano's bleak way of showing the world and humanity, while staying in touch with his earlier works, which were far more lighthearted. I think this series is a little bit slow at first, but from chapter 30 and onwards, it never looks back, and it's full of twists and emotionally heartbreaking moments like typical Asano. I think this story is special, and is an Asano work I would recommend to anyone, since it's kind of like the only Asano work that it won't make me look like I'm mentally unstable. I really enjoyed this, and I can say with confidence that it's one of the best manga I've read in the last 2 years. Oh man, so this recommendation comes from MoonDoggie, who has some of the best content on YouTube, and is a very likable and talented individual. If you're watching me and you haven't seen this guy, you're doing something wrong, especially since he made the little animated segments in the trailer for the channel. Unfortunately for me, out of all the things he recommended to me, he asked me to check out the Evangelion manga sitting at 96 chapters, and I think you all know my feelings towards Eva weren't the best, and to be honest, when it comes to the manga, I think my feelings aren't that much different from the anime. I can see the value and the appeal, and as a story, I don't think it does anything wrong per se, but for the most part, I've read and seen other things that have been able to draw out an emotional investment or reaction that Eva seems incapable of doing for me despite how much I was told it would do so. So maybe it's an expectations thing. But the manga did get me more invested into the characters. Speaking of which, I did a personality test, and it seems the INFJ personality is the same as Crollo, Johan, Itachi, and Kaworu, which is concerning, but I don't put much stock into it since apparently it's the same personality type as Deku, Armin, Jordan Peterson, Carl Jung, Miura, Jesus, and the Communist Manifesto. I'm a conflicted individual, ladies and gentlemen, but it was really cool to see the direction in the manga, but for the most part, my opinion isn't that different from what I had about the anime years ago. The anime was actually a better experience overall, and I'd say that's the way to go when it comes with Eva, but the manga is still worth checking out for sure, especially if you're an Evangelion fan. Goodbye Eri was recommended to me by KanjiWrld, who's a close friend of mine and impresses me every time he uploads. That's if he uploads. Listen, after this AOT video he puts out, I'll probably finish Gintama before his next video. That's how long it takes, but he's genuinely hilarious and another very underrated channel. Made by Fujimoto, the creator of Chainsaw Man and Fire Punch, Goodbye Eri is a one-shot that puts Fujimoto's ability to get your interest and investment as efficiently as possible on full display. Follows Yuta, who's a filmmaker, and encounters a girl that would change his life forever. I refuse to really get into it further since anything else I say will be more of a spoiler than a hook, but the twist with this one is something else. So if you want a quick but impressive read, just check this out. Broken Ronin, who does content on mostly JJK but also a lot of the other shonen series, is my oldest friend when it comes to YouTube. We both started off around the same time, although he's had a different channel back then, and if it wasn't for him in Thailand, I wouldn't be here today. So there's a quick shout out to my brothers. Fighting an introspective main character with a messed up backstory, looking no further than Rikudo. I love this. 241 chapters and completed. This follows Riku, a boy that comes from a Mike Tyson, Sean Strickland type of home and ends up orphaned. Sadly, his caretaker is harmed, and he takes up boxing like his uncle, who is now a Yakuza, and rises through the ranks while learning to overcome his past demons and find purpose in his life. The artwork in this has some really captivating shots, and like most good boxing manga, it creates a feeling of momentum and impact through the paneling and artwork, but even more importantly, the series gets you invested in Riku's opponents and gives them satisfying storylines, be it short-term or long-term ones, with a very well-done romance subplot. I would have to say, out of all the boxing or boxing-adjacent series, this is up there with Holy Land and Ashita no Joe for me. Next recommendation comes from Thumin, because I forgot I only had 14 and not the 15 people I said I'd have, and she's a YouTuber who covers art in the art community, and she's easily one of the most optimistic, bright, and uplifting people I know. And her recommendation was Killing Stalking. Okay, now before I throw her under the bus, she sold this to me as a pure psychological horror, not a romance, since we're both of equal opinions on this, but I'll get into that. It's completed 67 chapters and follows the main character Yoon, who has a crush on Sangwon, and stalks the guy and even breaks into his home, only to find out that Sangwon is a serial killer. From here on out, the story follows the relationship between these two, which can be described as abusive, toxic, twisted, and even those words are an understatement. As a thriller, it does a good job of making you feel tense and worried at every turn, as well as humanizing and adding a bit of nuance to a non-redeemable monster, although let me clarify, making an evil character have moments where they aren't pure evil doesn't absolve them, and your justification just can't be because the guy is hot. It just allows us to understand where things went very wrong. I had to think about this one since it feels as if this horrid and abusive dynamic is romanticized, but that's really like the fandom, and it's also from the perspective of the main character, who from the very beginning we see is crazy as well. Since at least when I read this, I immediately picked up on the psychopathic, narcissistic, and manipulative things Sang-woo, the clear villain of the story, did, while also seeing how the story presents the main character's clear mental instability and inability to see things for how they really are. I can see why this story has so much controversy surrounding it, and I think it will draw a strong reaction from anyone who reads it because of the graphic nature and emotionally sensitive topics it deals with. You've been warned. Now, Usogui is by far the longest series on this list, completed and at 539 chapters recommended to me by Advent, following the main character Madarame Baku, a god of gambling that is trying to make his way back from nothing to taking over the most powerful and influential organization in the world. I think this segment won't be able to do justice at my full in-depth thoughts about the series, of course, but I think the long chapter count is worth the gamble. Because the first half of the manga was very up and down for me, with a lack of interest in most of the characters, but I'll attribute that to the dialogue being painful at times, and most of what's going on being set up for the absolute insanity that takes place in the second half of the manga. The artwork is dope, and by the end of the series is some of the best in all of manga, and what started off as a tough experience for me to sit through as a whole turned into one of the best things I've read, with each chapter throwing me into the next, with fights that could take any series that's only focus is about fighting all the way to the top. A main character that turns out to be far better than what I could have ever predicted, a pretty solid cast, and one of the it's really hard when you strive for perfection, you know what I mean? But one of the best, there we go, main antagonists in all of manga. Seriously, the last two arcs, man. Every time I thought I had it figured out, the author adds a twist, and the way he ties in the character's evolution and self-realization through the gambles really makes a one-of-a-kind experience. So if you love the first half of Usogui while reading it, then oh man, you're in for a treat, and if you don't trust me, just keep reading. I tried this in February, dropped it, and Avon was like, read Usogui, so I had to. Thank you for making me read this. Now, real quick, just to get a little personal, this recommendation is kind of a special one since it actually comes from my fiance. Scamboli Reviews has been trying to get me to read Helper, which is 180. It's 188 chapters. There's a second season, but apparently due to some controversy, it hasn't been translated. The strongest thing about this manhwa from the jump is the artistic direction, and the way it implements backstories perfectly into the flow of things to make characters I was somewhat interested in to be characters that emotionally captivated me completely is superb. Following the main character, Gwangnam, who wakes up in the afterlife, I'm so sorry, and is destined to go to hell, which is shown by the black ticket on his wrist. But if he requires 100, he could turn it in for a white ticket to allow him to go to heaven or reincarnate. The premise is a strong one, with an eccentric main character and a great companion in Seisei that is such a great side character. The world building is some of my favorites since Land of the Lustrous, and is a great mix of action, mystery, and brief comedic moments. Garuden was recommended to me by Mysterious Weeb, who specializes in fighting manga and legit dominates that market. Only one issue. There were like 3 different versions, and I read the 1996 one before asking, but I think I read it because the one from the 80s is only like 8 chapters. So this one is sitting at 238 chapters, and it's a martial arts manga from the same artist as Baki, and the same author is Koya ni Kimono Dokukusu. Just roll with it. As to be expected, this manga is about martial arts and what it truly means to be strong. And overall, when it comes to fighting series, it's hard to have a bad time, and that's how I felt about this overall. It isn't as absurd as I've heard Baki is, but the fights in this series are still engaging, and the way it goes about exploring strength is a solid message. But when compared to other series that have fighting as its main draw, it isn't anywhere near my favorites, but maybe that's because the characters in this didn't really draw me as much. But overall, just like with every other series I talked about, check it out for yourself. Now comes the part of the video some of y'all skip to. Hi, yeah, you're not slick. The ranking. Now I want to clarify beforehand, I understand some of these series are at huge disadvantages since they're clearly early on within their story, and comparing stories from vastly different genres and lengths is difficult enough, but this is just how I feel about the stories from my least favorite to favorite, so don't take this personal, please have a life. At 15, I think this should be no surprise, Dick Fight Island. Am I going to elaborate? No. At 14, should be no surprise, Banging My Aunt, also refuse to elaborate. 13, I have Gantz E. I think for what it has so far, it's nothing more to me than cool artwork, since the story has already pulled some stuff out of its ass, which just completely broke my immersion in it. But personally, I just didn't really want to make me keep reading. It's cool though. And number 12 is Yomi no Sugai. As I said earlier, I think this manga has a lot of potential, but for the most part, I felt rather indifferent at this point. And number 11, Maria no Dainzai. It's a story with a lot of potential for character building and complex dynamics, but it could easily be so bad if it decides to go with only shocking moments like Jujika no Rakunin. But for right now, it actually managed to hook me more than obviously the other stuff that's on this list up to this point. And number 10, Garuden. This is a solid fighting manga, but for me, that was about it. Especially when compared to other works like Kengan Ashura, which I would recommend way before I would recommend this. Although to be fair, Kengan Ashura is like one of the best at what it does. It isn't bad, but I'm not crazy about it. And number 9, The Dangers in My Heart. Very wholesome manga, and if it's your sort of thing, then it's really worth checking out. I don't think there's anything crazy going on from a narrative point, but that's just because of its slice of life nature, but this is an easy series to like. Number 8, Goodbye Eri. This was probably the hardest one to rank, because this is a one-shot and everything else is long-running manga. But what it's capable of doing is enough to get it above some of the series I've read so far. I can't say I feel comfortable putting it higher than the other works that emotionally captivated me more, but I think this is a fair spot. At number 7, Killing Stalking. So, taking the series as intended, this series accomplishes its goal of being a psychological thriller and horror, and it evokes very strong feelings of tension and dread while reading something of said genre. It's very disturbing, but that's the point. And if a story can make you feel what it wants to make you feel while keeping you immersed, then I think it's doing something well. And number 6, Evangelion the manga. Despite how neutral and uninterested I sounded about it, it's mostly in comparison to my absolute favorites. As a story, it's undeniable this does a great job with the message it tries to communicate, and the characters even more so are really well fleshed out and allowed me to really appreciate them more in the manga. The anime was something I saw when I was watching anime, and I didn't really like watching it, and it wasn't just my thing in general, so maybe it deserves more of a fair chance now, but in regards to the actual manga, I think it's very good. Now, entering the top 5. And number 5 is Helper. Helper, by far, as I said, has the strongest artistic direction, I think, out of everything, and it's one of the most unique things on the list. I personally wouldn't put this above manhwa like Sweet Home, The Boxer, or Bastard, but it's easily up there, and I can see why my fiance kept bugging me about it. And number 4, Bokutachi ga Yarimashita. It's a one-of-a-kind experience because of its weirdness, but it was an engaging read from beginning to end. This series deserves more attention, and I highly recommend it. And number 3, Dead Demons of Destruction. Wasn't immediately engaging like some of the stuff on this list, but when the story all comes together with the twists and the message that the series relays, and it just shows why Asano's one of the best to ever do it, and the characters in this one, man. It's just, what a great read. And number 2, Rikudo. This was super close to being in the number 1 spot since I loved it thoroughly from beginning to end. The fighting, the characters, the message of the story, the art. I have no issues with this manga, and I think everyone can take away something from this amazing story. And at number 1, I think this was expected, but man, what a 3-1 comeback, because I was hating this thing at first, and I was ready to declare war on all of the obnoxious-ass Usogui fans, but you know what, by the end of it, I can see where the hype comes from. Now, I'd rather drink sulfuric acid than call it or anything peak fiction in 2023 entering 2024, because that's like the worst way to recommend anything. But the second half of this manga, which is all of the payoffs, deserves to be mentioned with the absolute best of the best. And so that was my experience when I allowed 15 of my YouTube pals to decide what I read for pretty much over a month. And I think I read almost 1,000 chapters worth of material, obviously half of that coming from Usogui on its own. If you're interested in this video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, as well as join the Patreon as we do watch parties every Sunday, and I'm thinking about doing some live manga readings in there as well, if that's something y'all would be interested in. Thank you all again for your support this year and that you've given the channel, and make sure you check out all of these amazing channels. Their links will also be in the description below, as well as the channel's merch. But as always, this has been The Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day, and peace.